Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, anywhere you are. Thank you all for joining for the GGG Week session on long-term strategies from planning to implementation for multi-level climate action. We have a nice lineup of speakers today to hear different perspectives from them with regard to the last advancements or on LTS. And I will pass it over for the opening remarks to Mrs. Helena MacLeod, Deputy Director General of GGGI and Head of the Green Growth Planning and Implementation Division. Helena, at your portfolio, is managing 30 country offices and is heading the program on planning and implementation of GGI. Helena, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So I think our country offices have gone up to about 45. We've opened so many in the last few months. And it's really wonderful for me, and I am very privileged in this role to visit so many of our members and partners. And in all of these countries, I'm fascinated by the different economies, you know, what the country is reliant on, what they export, what they import, where jobs come from, and the challenges that each of these countries are facing in their green growth transition. And the LT-LEDs is the fundamental cornerstone, or one of them, of economic planning in this very changed and changing world. So I'm fascinated by this subject area, but it's a very, very practical thing. It's politically often very charged, and bringing it down to the fundamentals of what can practically be done when it's a long-term scenario, but you need to actually make critical steps today is part of what we also try and do in our LT-LEDs. Very much linking to the investment side and mobilizing that investment. The recent preliminary results of the global stocktake highlight a few important issues where we stand regarding LT-LEDs. According to the report, it says, as parties formulate and communicate their LT-LEDs that chart just transitions towards net zero emissions by or around mid-century, tailored to different national circumstances, they should begin to implement concrete measures to shift to such pathways. Many parties have set goals and communicated strategies aiming for either net zero CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions around or about 2050. Yet in many cases, mitigation ambition in NDCs is not aligned with pathways to achieve LT-LEDs results. It's not an easy area, and it's not easy modeling where data is often lacking. And I wonder if that is something that will come out in the presentations today. So this session today is really to share ideas, because as we try and support our countries around the world, to really look at what needs to be done and what can be done today, but planning for the future. This is a critical area. So I'm listening and I'm learning and seeing how it can be made practical and what the best practices in this space are. So thank you to all the speakers and the participants. I look forward to learning from you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena, for these very inspiring opening remarks and setting the scene for the session today. I'm very happy to moderate this session with this great lineup of speakers. I'm Stelios Grafakos, Deputy Head of the Climate Action and Inclusive Development Unit, working on LT-LEDs and supporting our member and partner countries to develop their long-term strategies, green growth strategies, NDCs, so on and so forth. So we will move to our first speaker. We have a series of speakers listening to different perspectives from organizations supporting countries to develop long-term strategies, also from donors providing support, but also from government representatives to share their lessons learned and experiences on developing LTS or LT-LEDs, and also looking on finance and implementation aspects. Our first speaker is Saskia Hergen, Senior Associate in the 2050 Pathways Platform And Saskia is focusing on long-term strategies support for countries in partnership with NDC Partnership. One of the representatives is here with us also, whilst leading the establishment of an LTS training program. Saskia has a background in international development, and she has worked before for Oxfam Novit. Saskia, over to you to hear the 2050 Pathways perspectives.
Thanks a lot, Stelios, and good morning or afternoon, everyone. So I was already introduced. So my name is Saskia, work as a senior associate for the 2050 Pathways platform. And we were invited to speak about the progress that we see in the LT-led space, specifically on countries working on implementing their long-term strategy. But before doing that, and then you can go to the next slide, I want to give a brief introduction on the 2050 Pathways platform itself, for the people who don't know it yet. So we were established after COP20 in 2016, so 1 year after the Paris Agreement was established. As during that COP, parties expressed the need for what was called providing a so-called Big Tent approach in developing long-term strategies, so to provide guidance in the development process. And we do so, as you see here on screen, via 3 main pillars. So the first is capacity building. That's the resource, the training part that Stelios just mentioned. So we provide training sessions on that. There is a knowledge and advisory pillar of our work. So we finance the involvement of knowledge material on long-term strategies. But we also closely work with, also introduced already by Stelios, with NDC Partnership on a thematic goal by providing feedback to the incoming country requests that focus on long-term strategies. And the third pillar is hands-on financial support that we give to national governments that are developing or implementing their long-term strategy. And thus far, we directly supported the LT-led processes in 16 countries, as you see here. Looking at what we here to speak about today, the global status of LT-LEDs, and then you can go to the next slide and immediately to the slide thereafter. There are 68 countries that formally submitted a national long-term strategy. So if we can go to the next slide, then you see it on screen. And one click further. Next slide again. Yes. Oh, no, one back now. So 68 countries who submitted a national long-term strategy. If you count the EU, who also submitted an LT-LED as a whole, then in total it will be 72, but 68 independent submissions to the UNFCCC. And we know that a lot of the long-term strategies are currently also in progress, with support through, for example, the thematic goal from NDCP, but also with support from other development partners. And to mention one who is here today, the 2050 facility of AFD. Zooming then in to be able to share a bit more on what we see happening in the long-term strategy space on implementation of a long-term strategy, I'd like to quickly take you through the 3 phases of a long-term strategy development process, and that's on the next slide. So you see 3 key building blocks on screen now. So the first is laying the foundations, which merely involves the development of a long-term vision. That is the basis for a full long-term strategy. Phase 2 consists, or building block 2 consists of elaboration of a full long-term strategy that involves data gathering, so doing proper scenario analysis, testing it with irrelevant stakeholders, etc., to really build a full long-term strategy. And third is what we are discussing today, operationalization of a long-term strategy, or in other words, implementing it. And if we plot on where countries are on these 3 phases, we see that most countries work at the moment on their long-term vision or elaborating on their full long-term strategies. And not many countries are implementing their strategies yet. Also for countries who submitted their LT-LEDs, we see only a few who have clear implementation plans included in their long-term strategy. So I think there's an area for support or for work that we see as the platform. Zooming then in on the roof of this of these 3 building blocks, so the house that you see here, the operationalization phase. What I want to do is give 2 country examples of countries who are at the stage of implementing their long-term strategy, and I'm sure that during this webinar we will hear more country examples later on. But first, the two country examples that I want to mention by highlighting the 3 steps in the roof of this house. So first key step in implementing the long-term strategy is the development of a policy and regulation framework. So you see here policy and regulation framework, finance and investment framework, and socialization. Zooming in on the policy and regulation framework, and then you can go to the next slide. This framework is an important part of implementing the long-term strategy, as it translates the content of the strategy into national policies. And one country that developed such policy framework is Costa Rica. So what they did is they developed a framework with more than 70 targets or measures from 35 different government agencies and line ministries. And that framework gave insights into the overall objective of the policy measures, its indicators, the required activities, what key stakeholders should be or actors should be involved in implementing it. So quite detailed. And that detailed framework of concrete policy measures helped Costa Rica, in their case, to mobilize $2.4 billion from international finance sources, which is extremely helpful for countries, of course, who seek to implement their long-term strategy.
Saskia, could you complete in 1 minute?
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
And that's also my bridge to another key step in operationalizing a long-term strategy. And you can say on the same slide, that's the importance of developing a finance and investment plan. So such an investment plan translates targets, policy targets identified in the long-term strategy into financial needs. As I just mentioned in the example of Costa Rica, their policy framework served as the basis to develop such an investment plan and to leverage finance. So for them, it was super important to mobilize external investments as well. In the case of Costa Rica, this was done, by the way, merely through so-called policy-based loans. But you can have a full learning session on that, so I won't go into detail there. We also see other countries who are at the stage of developing such investment plans, and I think Nathan might speak more on that, because there are 2 requests from Nigeria and Kenya made through the Medical to develop a net zero investment plan. So there is a key need for support there. Finalizing, hopefully within a minute, to the third and final key step, if you ask us, for implementing a long-term strategy, that's socialization. You can go to the next slide. So socialization is about making the wider government and the wider society aware of what's in a long-term strategy and what it means to them. And that starts, of course, with the responsibility of a responsible ministry who does the government to raise awareness around the content of the long-term strategy, but has the formal function or ends with holding the government accountable on commitments that are made in the long-term strategy. And Sweden is a good example here. Because they launched a so-called Climate Policy Council, and that council is tasked with holding the government, or assessing actually, if the government is compatible with its climate commitments that they made through the long-term strategy. They also initiated another initiative, the Fossil-Free Initiative, in which they closely work with the private sector, the industrial sector in their country, to achieve the country's low carbon commitments. So the commitments that are laid out in the long-term strategy. I will close here because I think my minute is over. But 3 key phases that I wanted to highlight in what's needed to properly implement a long-term strategy. And I hope that colleagues or speakers in this call will maybe also touch upon these points. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Saskia, for highlighting the recent updates on LTS from different countries, large number of countries you support, and identifying the lack of certain implementation aspects in their LTS, and also bringing some very good examples and experiences on those issues, particularly around policy and investment plan, incorporating the LTS, the case of Costa Rica, and the socialization case, and awareness raising in different line ministries in Sweden. Thank you very much. Very concise. Now we move to the next speaker. Herve Breton is a manager of AFD 2050 facility, with experience of around 25 years of professional experience with development finance, institutions, notably the French Development Agency, AFD, where he served as a country director and a senior expert on climate change. Hervé, we look forward to your speech around the role of development agencies on long-term strategies. Over to you.
Thank you, Stelios. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Thank you for inviting me. Just a few words of introductions. Have just taken over the management of the deployment of our 2050 facility, which is dedicated to support to LT-LEDs in a number of countries. Yes, with a background of climate finance within AFD and other institutions. So just given the few minutes that I have to speak about the role of development agencies with regard precisely to supporting long-term strategies, I thought it just might be useful to just come back to a few considerations as to basically why development agencies consider they have a specific role and how they do it, or at least how AFD, the agency that I represent, does it. So maybe the first slide, I don't know if I had speaking notes. Yeah, so thank you. So as to the rise, really, I think there's no need to insist on the fact that, of course, LTSCs, LT-LEDs are an essential feature of the implementation of the Paris Agreement that was said by Elena. That's obviously central to our topic today. But the idea is also to sort of underscore that, of course, so that they're expected by Article 419, but basically they really embody a strong commitment that from the countries that eventually should transform into a sequence of shorter term to medium term decision on policies to implement, and that they will and they have to automatically relate to NDC targets and their regular updates. So as such, this alone would probably suffice to justify, if we come back to the why question, that development agencies support the elaboration of LTSs as per the development mandate period. As again, it's hardly conceivable these days to dissociate basically development from low carbon and resilient development, if you will. Now, of course, it also turns out that practically Article 9 of the Paris Agreement also directly calls for supports to country-driven strategies in the context of the provision of climate finance from developed countries' parties. So at least those development agencies that depend on those countries are directly called upon and concerned by that provision of the Paris Agreement. Then, of course, there is the explicit reference to low carbon and resilient development pathways in Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement. And one can only assume that Article 2.1c, speaking of a development pathway, aims at basically the sum of country pathways, and that's the only interpretation possible. So beyond that, and precisely because of those provisions of the Paris Agreement, donors also make actually commitments for their activities to be aligned with the Paris Agreement, and that's encompassing not only the provision of climate finance, but precisely also the consistency of all their financing with low carbon and resilient development pathways of countries. And this, of course, necessitates, if you will, visibility on as robust as possible resilient pathways in countries. And when I mean robust, I mean plausible, and probably most of all, owned by the countries. So basically, this is also a very strong incentive for donors to actually engage in cooperation with countries to elaborate and help support the elaboration of those long-term strategies in a way that's owned by the countries. Of course, I just like to mention in passing that this Paris alignment from donors agencies should not be considered the main motivation for support. Of course, what is at stake is really basically the redirection of overall financing flows. So basically, if we can quickly go to the next slide. Thank you. So
And
that's
then
basically
if you
based.
could, yeah, one more minute.
I will finish in one
Perfect.
minute. Yeah. So that's basically based on this overall context that AFD, as early as 2018, has decided together with France, who's actually financing the facility, to put in place that AFD 250 facility that's devoted precisely to entering into cooperations with a number of countries on their LTSs, with essentially three dimensions: capacity building, acquiring the right tools, development of LTSs based on modeling, and eventually, in the case of advanced cooperation, transforming that into public policies, investment plans, etc. The overarching principle being, of course, again, country ownership and a mix of international and local expertise mobilized. Maybe just to round it up, the very last slide, again, the idea I'd like to probably, and that will lead to question, the sort of experience we have from having implementing this since 2018 is against the context specificity of the exercises, the key aspect of engaging ministries across the board. Now, and now that basically our positioning is evolving with countries, the themes that are emerging is really the necessity to work both on resilient development and low carbon together, and to precisely not forget, of course, the social aspects in whenever we can, of course, just transition. And an aspect that very often is does not necessarily appear in the exercises is the spatial aspect of the planning that we'd like to try and develop in next coming supports. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Herb, for giving us this a nice overview of how financial institutions and development agencies aim and try to align with the Paris Agreement, and of course that the mandate is about development. And it's very nice to hear that, of course, we cannot differentiate or disentangle development, low carbon, and climate resilience. So, and that's, I think it came also very clearly at your last points that climate resilience and low carbon should be parts of this exercise when countries develop their LTLEDs, and of course, including social aspects, as you highlighted, through a robust and country-owned process and strategy, and very important also highlights and outcomes of your experience on focusing also on special issues, special aspects, particularly when we talk about climate resilience. Thank you very much. Now we can move to the next speaker from the International Renewable, excuse me. So yes, from the NDC Partnership, Nathan Mesindre is project manager of the NDC partnership, thematic call on LT-LEDs and NDC alignment. This is very timely to hear from Nathan the last updates on the thematic call on LT-LEDs. Nathan, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Stelios, and thanks for the invitation. So really briefly, my name is Nathan Menilre. I'm currently the project manager for the thematic call, which is the NDC Partnerships initiative to support the alignment, the updating, and the enhancement of both LT-LEDs and NDCs. I'm based in Bonn, in Germany, where our support unit, the Secretariat for the Partnership, is located. We also have an office in Washington, D.C. at WRI. Next slide, please. So essentially, the thematic call is an initiative that we launched at the last COP to prepare and support countries in developing LT-LEDs. I think it's been mentioned by Saskia as well. We're working very closely with 2050 Pathways on the LT-LEDs front of this, but also on NDCs. So previously, for the last update cycle for the 2020 deadline, which turns out happened in 2021, countries were expected to update and come up with more ambitious NDCs. And we had an initiative called CAP, Climate Action Enhancement Package. The thematic call is now sort of our merged initiative to work on these two fronts, with once again a clear focus on the alignment. I think it's been mentioned as part of a broader ecosystem of planning tools under the Paris Agreement by Hervé in the previous presentation. I think this is really a key component of it, of how you think of this architecture between the sort of medium-term and long-term planning for low emissions and the NDCs as a contribution that countries put forward every 5 years in terms of ideally carbon budgets, adaptation priorities, and sort of short to medium-term actions. Next slide, please. Just to introduce the call briefly, we of course welcome any partnering involvement from countries. I'll talk a bit about the number of countries we have that have requested support, but also from partner agencies. I think we work with quite a lot of the speakers already today. But the way the NDC partnership works is that we leverage our member institutions. Most speakers, I think, at GGGI Week are engaged and providing support, including GGGI, of course. And on top of that, we have our own dedicated funding to support any requests that are not picked up. It's aligned with our country engagement process, so the regular work we do on NDC implementation. It's the same system for the country. The point is really to make it easy for the country to access support. And it's, of course, every request is really constantly being, we're trying to mobilize support for any request. For instance, if a partner picks up a sectoral visioning or a sectoral modeling tool, we'll try to fund or find another partner. Next slide, please. We have, in consultation with 2050 Pathways, we have broken down the thematical into a few different support streams. The idea here is to have countries just reflect and focus also on the processes of developing LT-LEDs and NDCs, not just produce a document for the sake of producing a document under the Paris Agreement, but really try to engage the whole of government. It really shouldn't be a document that's owned by one single ministry. It's not a reporting, it's not a BUR, it's not a BTR. It is really a national planning tool that needs to be used and owned by the planning ministries, by the finance authorities, and then by the sectoral ministries, so that they are able to arbitrate between different proposals based on funding, based on rational, based on emissions. And so we've have three phases. I'm going to speed up a little bit. Preparatory support. For the LT-LEDs, it can be quite simply the visioning exercise, which is often a good sense of the political willingness, the ambition of the country. For the NDCs, it can also just be reflection, national consultations, taking stock of where the country is at. Next slide, please. Then the second stream of support is actually developing these documents or updating them. As part of the Paris Agreement, there's this sort of ratcheting mechanism. It's the language that's used in the Paris Agreement, in that countries are expected, or at least strongly invited, to come up with more ambitious documents. And in this stream of support, this is where most of the work happens in terms of sectoral modeling, economic impact analysis, costing, putting the documents together. And this can take quite a while. We've had the experience just from the NDC update cycle in 2020. I think countries only started working, at least developing countries we work with, started working on updating their NDCs a couple of months before COP. Turns out it's a process that takes much longer. In the LT-LEDs, from our experience, I think this is a process that takes multiple years in general. So this phase is really about sort of developing the documents, taking the time to fully embed them, anchor them within the national functioning. And last slide. Next slide, please. And so the third stream is also, I think, to open the door for countries that have already developed an LT-LEDs. And here we are looking at supporting what we've called transformational action. In a sense, this is to provide countries with an LT-LEDs the opportunity to do sectoral reform work, implement some of the key long-term strategies or policies that they've put forward. One example I think Saskia mentioned is the link also with investment planning. So this is something we support in general as part of our NDC support processes. This LT-LEDs visioning exercise opens the door for much longer investment planning scopes. And I think this is quite critical. What we've realized is that maybe the NDC timeline is slightly too short to think about sort of structural reform, structural investment in some sectors. And we do need to have at least a vision, at least a sort of a longer term rationale for sectoral investments to happen. This is to be complemented, for example, with guarantees, with appropriate regulation and policies in the long term. And then I have one more slide, and then I'll wrap up here. One or two more slides. Yep.
Thank you.
Next, please.
Last minute. Thank you.
This is just really quickly for countries, if they want to request support, just get in touch with us. There's also a link on our website. You can just express your interest as a country. Next slide, please. Next, sorry. Next, just acknowledging the great work 2050 Pathways is doing in helping us develop the requests, the request here. I think maybe I've missed a slide. Just to say, we have now 50 countries that are engaged. We have 32 that have finalized requests to receive support. Sorry, I think it's the wrong slide deck, but no problem. And most of them are currently requesting support on long-term visioning. I think this is quite like what Saskia said. We do expect an increase in the focus to be also on NDC enhancement from basically this COP onwards. Countries are expected to submit new NDCs by 2025 at COP 30 in Brazil. So I'll stop here. You can always email me. We have cool data and facts about what we're working on. And thanks again for the invitation. Back to you, Stelios.
Thank you, Nathan, for providing the updates and insights of the NDC partnership call on LT-LEDs and NDC alignment. And you emphasize the importance of aligning long-term strategies with the NDCs. So that's an important embedded objective in the call. And also the importance you emphasize in the three stages of the LTS process, the importance of a whole government engagement and owned by not only one ministry, but different ministries. So it's, in essence, it's a national planning tool, very important to keep in mind. So it's not something to check, but is really a planning tool that should be owned by the government. And also you emphasize, as previous speakers, the importance of the long-term transformational elements of LTS, particularly with regard to investment planning and policy and regulations aspects that can be incorporated in these strategies. So with that, and talking about alignments of different planning processes and strategies, we can move to the next speaker from the International Renewable Energy Agency. Iris van der Lucht is going to talk about the alignment of LT-LEDs with the long-term energy scenarios. So Iris has been working with IRENA's long-term energy scenarios network since 2022. The LTS network provides a global platform to exchange knowledge and good practices in the use and development of model-based LTS long-term energy scenarios to guide the clean energy transition. Iris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stelios, for the introduction, and GGI for the invitation to share our analysis on long-term energy scenarios, or LTES, and long-term low-emission development strategies, or LT-LEDs. Very briefly about IRENA, considering the time, we are an intergovernmental organization. We currently have 168 member states, and we promote the sustainable use of renewable energy. And one of the ways we do that is through studies like the one I'll briefly be presenting some insights on. So on the next slide, I can start talking about the study. Yes, thank you very much. So to start with, I want to give some definitions of LTES and LT-LEDs. So to start with, LTES are long-term energy scenarios. In essence, what they do is they provide quantitative pathways on potential energy sector developments through scenarios. They've been used for decades in many different sectors, in the private sector, in academia, but what we want to focus on now is their use in the public sector, where they form a basis for long-term energy policy making. Their scope tends to be the energy or the power sector, and they cover typically 10 to 30 years into the future. Then on LT-LEDs, this is probably a bit more familiar with the audience here, but I'll go through a quick definition anyway. They define mid-century goals for a just transition to global net zero emissions. They are officially submitted to the UNFCCC by a country, and they can be either with or without scenarios. Their scope tends to be the whole economy, and their timeline is until 2050 or later, so a bit longer than the LTES. So we conducted an analysis. You can see that our cover of our report here on the right side of the slide. The aim of this analysis was to compare the institutional processes behind the development of these plans and the technical coverage of their scenarios. So to have a better comparison, we compared only LTES with scenario-based LT-LEDs. So we left out the non-scenario-based for this analysis. And we ended up comparing 24 LTES and 36 LT-LEDs. So with that in mind, I can go to the next slide for a brief overview of our findings. Thank you. So to go with our institutional analysis, so our government aspects of the development of these plans, we first looked at which institutions actually publish these documents. So you can see here in the pie charts on the left side of the slide, the LTES, the energy scenarios, tend to be published by the Energy Ministry, about half of them. And LT-LEDs tend to be published by climate or environment ministries. So there's more to it, but what's important to know now is that they tend to be published by different institutions. Then on the right side, I'll go very briefly through some other findings. We looked at stakeholder consultations. So LT-LEDs, virtually all of them included stakeholder consultations and also had a broad engagement among stakeholders. So not just citizens, not just experts, but a broader segment. And LTES, about 2/3 included stakeholder consultations, and there the focus lay on experts. Then we also looked at if they included net zero targets, which most of the LT-LEDs did, and only 7 of the 24 LTS did. Can be partially explained by the difference in timeline. And for the last 2, for the sake of time, I'll skip those, but they're generally aligned on scope and average number of scenarios. So on the next slide, I can discuss some technical analysis results. So here we looked at the coverage of the scenarios of both types of plans. So you can see here an overview graph of different elements. And the bars show the percentage of the LTES in blue and the LT-LEDs in green, whether their scenarios included them. So I want to highlight some of them. If you can click next, an animation should appear. Yes. So the blue circled areas on power production, electricity infrastructure, and storage. Here the blue bars are longer, meaning the LTES more comprehensive than the LTLEDs on these areas. Quick note on power production, the bars here on this slide look the same length, but if you go a bit more in detail, we can see, for example, for wind and solar, that the LTES are more comprehensive. So that's why we circled it here in blue. And then on the next click, the green circles, yes, some green circles appear on the direct use of renewables, energy efficiency, and other mitigation measures. Here, the green bars are longer, meaning that the LTLEDs are more comprehensive. So I just want to highlight this to show that the different types of plants have different focus areas and different strengths, and they can learn from each other here. So one of the recommendations is that these plants can build upon each other rather than being developed in isolation. Now, finally, I want to highlight on this slide, next click, please. Yes, on resource, oh, sorry, yes. On resource availability, here circled here in black. These are things like water availability, land availability, and more importantly, critical mineral availability. The bars here are quite short, meaning that neither of these plants are very comprehensive about it. So they're neither the type of plants, I mean. And especially on critical mineral availability, we looked at how they were included, whether quantitatively or qualitatively. None of the plants we looked at actually modeled critical mineral availability. So yeah, we just want to highlight this. This is a very important aspect, and we'd recommend that plants include them. So then on the next slide, I want to finish with some recommendations that we have based on this study for authors of LTS and LTLEDs. First of all, coordination. We just heard it from Nathan from NDC Partnership. We'd recommend countries to coordinate within the government so that the plan is not just owned by one ministry, but by multiple, and that the plans, the LTS and the LTLEDs are aligned with each other. And then secondly, engagement and stakeholder engagement. We'd recommend engaging a broad range of stakeholders to get the most inclusive process possible. Then to develop their scenarios going beyond the traditional elements that you include, to include elements like resource availability, to have a strong communication strategy and outreach to help send a signal and drive technology transfers and signal investments. And to finally, on implementation, we recommend considering enshrining the ambitions of the plans into law. This also sends a strong signal about a country's commitment and can positively affect implementation. With that, I finally want to focus briefly on another side of Fabrina's work. We work with countries that want to improve their long-term energy planning on all of these areas that are listed here on the slide right now. We do this on a national basis. So we have capacity building trainings. For example, when a country wants to build a renewable energy master plan or an NDC. We also do regional support. For example, in terms of the Continental Master Plan for Africa, which has recently been named as a flagship project for the African Union. Yeah, so if you're interested in that, please reach out. And on the next final slide, I have a contact if you're interested. Yes, so thank you very much for listening. With that, I include the presentation LTS and LTLEDs. If you're interested to hear more, we're currently developing a follow-up report on this research, building on the conclusions from the previous report. We'll be presenting interim results at COP28, and we'll publishing the final report sometime next year. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Stelios.
Thank you, Iris, for presenting the results of this very interesting analysis you conducted on the alignment of LTES and LTLEDs. You also presented some very interesting results. For instance, that we see resource availability, which is an important factor for several mitigation actions, is missing and is lacking. So clearly there is space for improvement there, along with the very useful recommendations around the process and how those two LTS and LTLEDs could be further aligned with regard to be more inclusive with different stakeholders on the development side, the communication, so on and so forth. And with that, we will move now to listen experiences and lessons learned from countries' perspectives. And we can start with Ethiopia. Mr. Vupset Mengistu from the Ministry of Planning and Development at the Environment and Climate Change is a desk coordinator, and he's going to talk about the LT-LEDs in Ethiopia. So Mr. Vupset Mengistu has a master's degree in geography and environmental studies, specialized in natural resource and environmental management. Vupset, the floor is yours to hear from you concisely the lessons learned from Ethiopia and LT-LEDs.
Hello, everybody.
We can hear you, yes.
I can't hear. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you, Stelios. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. My name is Vupset Mengistu, just currently working as Environment and Climate Change Desk Coordinator in the Ministry of Planning and Development of Ethiopia. So just today, I would like to present Ethiopian long-term low emission development and climate resilient development strategies in a way from planning to implementation. From background, when we have seen our country experience, Ethiopia have just an experience to produce climate resilient development strategies, starting from climate CRG, that's climate resilient green economy strategies adopted in 2011. From that experience, our country are working on climate resilient development issues. After that, as Paris Agreement, that countries are already committed to produce their carbon emission reduction strategies and also report to the UNFCCC. Accordingly, our country also produced its first National Determined Contribution, or NDC, and currently also produced the updated NDC and submitted to the UNFCCC. And also, as part of that agreement, as part of the Paris Agreement, we also produce as a long-term low emission and climate resilient development strategy in collaboration with GGI. We are prepared this document. Just let me proceed to the next slide. When we have seen the importance of this LT-LEDs in the planning of Ethiopian transformation, we have seen that this long-term low emission development strategy is a key in planning to bridging Ethiopia's sustainable development with that of net zero growth and climate resilience objectives, and also it provides a roadmap for long-term decarbonization and climate resilience objectives. From that, we have seen that just Ethiopia requires financial capacity building and technical support to implement these long-term low emission development strategies and to fully achieve long-term climate development objective. So to realize this strategy that our country have its own ambitions with simultaneous support achievements, and also develop the objective aligned with that of 10-year development strategies. That means that our long-term low emission development strategies are just aligned with our 10-year development plan. That for an information that our country have a 10-year development plan. So this long-term low emission development strategies are aligned with that of our 10-year development plan that exceed until 2013. So it's aligned with 10-year development plan. The other things that when we are developing this long-term low emission strategies, is also are planning to develop CDRC, that's what climate development reporting system that transform from implementation of tracking that Ethiopia as an on-base track to report the information regarding to climate and development issues. Next slide. Just the process of Ethiopian LT-LEDs, we have seen that from the diagram. So the entire LT-LEDs development process are coordinated by the Ministry of Planning and Development in coordination with that of all sectors or line ministries that are working in the country. and also with the technical assistance with GGI, and also financial support of financial development agencies. So the coordination structure of Ethiopians seems like what I've seen on this one. The Ministry of Planning and Development have coordination and guidance role. We have steering committee. The steering committee have just oversight and also produce an endorsement. So the steering committee have composed of line ministries, different private and academic, and also different sectors are categorized under the steering committee. We have also sectoral analysis and modeling, cross-sectoral analysis that are the modeling scenario, developing technical working group, macroeconomic group, macroeconomic analysis, strategy analysis. So just as a whole, we have seen that we have a wider group of stakeholder consultation to produce these long-term, long emission development strategies. Next slide. So when we have seen these LTDs, LTDs have already aligned with just different policies. For instance, when we have seen our terrain development plan, as the LTDs have aligned with our 10, as I've already mentioned, is aligned with our 10-year development plans. That in 10-year development plan is one of the most pillar is climate resilient development. So it's already aligned with this long-term low emission development strategies. The other thing that national determined contribution, we have seen NDC. We have already developed different scenarios within longer-term low emission development strategies. So NDC aligned scenario is one of one that contributes for aligned with that of long-term low emission development. Currently, we have already developed the green resilient recovery strategies. So these green resilient recovery strategies are also working as aligned with that of long-term low emission development strategies, and it is intervention areas and it's also this implementation part. So it's aligned with that of green resilient recovery strategies. Next slide.
If
so when we have seen the
could
of
speed up the process, Bhupshat, and focus on the key messages.
So this long-term emission development, as I've already mentioned, is really aligned with what 10-year development plan. It's also aligned with that of NDC, and it's also is a target to produce it have also integrated with that of better measuring, reporting, and verification of MRV in the monitoring reward system, to produce a climate in the development reporting in a new models. And also we have to plan to mobilize a resource for the estimated investment requirements. Next slide. We have just in the preparation of this long-term development, we have developed there are different alternative or different scenarios from the diagrams that we have seen. We have business as usual scenario, late action scenario, NDC aligned scenario, and the maximum ambition scenario. This all scenario have its own implications on the long-term low emission development strategies. For instance, when I have seen the business as usual scenario, it's a baseline that we have measured against the targets that we have already reached as business as usual in the last to meet the 2015 target. Late action scenario is also it's late action that is ambitious to as such important for our implications. So NDC aligned scenario is just a preferred scenario that is aligned with NDC in the year 2013 and achieved in 2 years 2013. Then after that, it increased by the year 2035 and achieve net zero emission by 2015. So NDC aligned scenario preferred in our country and also preferred in terms of cost benefit analysis. So it's preferred in our country, this NDC aligned scenarios. Next.
If you could wrap up or just quickly.
When we have seen the investment needs in financing strategy in our country, to highlight on this one, we have seen from the table that just the power generation and agricultural sector have taken high investment as compared to other intervention areas or intervention sectors. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, when we have seen the total investment required for this long-term low emission development strategy, we have estimated that around $154 billion. And also, when the community funds are available as compared to investment required, annual financing gap is about 4 billion USD over the year 2010 to 2013. So the financing strategy objective of different objectives, for instance, increase resource mobilization from domestic and public investments, increase mobilization of resources from international funding, investment in vetting from financing, and climate finance policies that are domestically produced. So through this mechanism, we are targeted to achieve our strategies in terms of implementation of finance. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, I think this is the last slide that this is merely based on our intervention areas or on the implementation of this long-term low emission development strategies, and also within that of green resilience recovery strategy. We have seen that initially, just our country prioritizes this important point, this important intervention areas. For instance, we have electric vehicle adoption. This EV charging, electric vehicle charging. We have developed in different. We are providing EV charging station in different regions of in our country, just coordinated by Ministry of Transport and Logistics that we are producing. I think it's just supported by the GGI in producing these pre-feasibility studies. The second one is just collaborating with the Ministry of Agriculture. We are producing soil asset management and improve agricultural productivity, and also renewable energy and waste management are in collaboration with, I think, Ministry of Urban and Construction. So these are intervention areas that the LT leads are working on. So we have seen the current state of these intervention areas. I think pre-feasibility studies are already finalized for electric vehicle, and also program consultants are in preparation, and stakeholder consultation are already undertaken.
Well,
process. Yeah.
Thank you
Yes.
so much for this overview of the lessons learned and achievements of the LT LEDs in Ethiopia. To highlight a few, it's clear that the investment needs assessment and investment plan was already incorporated in the strategy, something that was highlighted by the previous speaker as a good practice and something that could ensure moving from planning to investment and implementation. And we see already some implementation related steps taken already, along with the fact that all relevant line ministries were engaged in the process, and we saw quite an extensive stakeholders engagement through the process. And talking about the alignment of different strategies and plans, we will move to the next speaker from Zambia, where we'll focus on
I believe we lost Stelios.
Hello, Stelios. Yeah.
Yes, I'm back. Sorry, my computer is getting a bit independent. So now with that, we are moving to the next speaker, Mr. Hedges Tembo from the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment in Zambia. He's a Chief Green Economy Officer, and he's by background development economist with over 15 years of experience working in Zambia's public sector. And he's actually actively participating in the formulation and coordination of the implementation of Zambia's 7th and 8th national development plans, while at the Ministry of Finance and National Planning. So, Mr. Hedges, the floor is yours to hear the insights of the Green growth strategy of Zambia. If you can be concise, will be really appreciated. We have few more minutes, we were informed, so please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Stelios, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Okay, next slide. Next slide. And next slide. Okay, so as Stelios has indicated, as Zambia, we have embarked on a process to formulate our first ever green growth strategy. And this slide here is just speaking to exactly what informed us to embark on this process. When you analyze our growth from 2006, when we articulated our vision 2030, you will note that growth has been on average about 5% up to the year 2022. And this growth has been driven by wholesale and retail trade, mining, construction, and transport sectors, which are largely non-renewable sectors with weak linkages to the rest of the economy. The other thing is that this growth has led to an increase in deforestation and forest degradation, land degradation. It has led to unsustainable fishing, loss of biodiversity, unsustainable production and consumption patterns. And the other thing is that when we analyzed our greenhouse gas emission trajectory, we discovered that there's been an increase of about 47% in our emission levels of greenhouse gases from 1994 to 2016. But as a country, we still remain a net on sink. And then again, when you look at the growth, you discover that it's not been as socially inclusive as expected, as total poverty remains persistently high. We are talking around 60% total poverty, with extreme poverty at 48%. Sorry, those numbers, I need to update those numbers because we only recently got our report for the living conditions monitoring survey. And then there's therefore need to change the character of our economic growth to one that is environmentally friendly, but also socially inclusive. So that is basically what informed our initiative to develop the green growth strategy. Next slide. So in terms of the process, we commenced the process with an inception. We have 6 phases. So there's an inception phase where we conceptualized what green growth entailed for Zambia. We developed a roadmap with milestones and timelines, appointed a technical working group, and then we developed a concept note on exactly how we envisioned the process of formulating our green growth strategy. And then we moved to the next stage where we did our green growth diagnosis and assessment. This, we basically took stock of everything green growth in the country, the challenges, the opportunities, and so on. During this process, we also undertook to develop a green growth index with the support from the Global Green Growth Institute. We currently also developing a green economy model with, again, support from the Global Green Growth Institute. So these processes are informing us. For example, the model is informing us on the targeting, while the Green Growth Index is informing us on how we are supposed to track progress in the implementation of the strategy, but also how we benchmark our performance as a country in implementation of green growth investments with like-minded countries that are also implementing these interventions. Then we are currently drafting the strategy. In fact, I need to emphasize that we are finalizing the drafting of our strategy with those processes. We are holding drafting sessions, and we currently are looking at undertaking validation processes in the at the subnational level, meaning in the provinces, and then we'll have our national validation sometime next month. And then we move to approval by the Council of Ministers on Climate Change. It's a multi-sectoral Council of Ministers consisting of various ministries of government. And then we, at the same time, are developing an implementation plan, basically results framework, to inform us about exactly what we need to implement, the different outputs that would need to be attained in order for us to achieve our green growth objectives. Next slide. So through this process, I think some of the major challenges that have come out are the issue of weak or poor data on the green economy. I think it's imperative that we have data that is available, accessible, and complete for tracking progress at benchmarking Zambia's performance in the implementation of green investments. But this data is scanty, and in most instances, we've had to use proxies and internationally generated data. But this also has enabled us to identify exactly what we need to do as a country to develop this data that we need to track progress. So we are working with the Zambia Statistics Agency to see how we begin to develop the data on the green economy. And then getting people to think long-term, again, is a challenge. I think you know that the benefits of green growth in most instances become evident in the medium to long term, but then the thinking, particularly when you are in a country that is heavily debt or heavily indebted, and you are looking at short-term solutions to the debt, and then you're talking long-term investments in green growth. People sometimes do not understand this, and therefore you need strong advocacy and strong pitch on the need for the just transition. And then, of course, weak public awareness and education on the green economy. And this is also true for some policymakers. So we need to strengthen education and awareness raising on the green economy. Then weak implementation capacity. Again, we need to develop a critical mass of officers with technical competencies to drive this agenda. And of course, inadequate financing and investments in the green in green growth. We have mobilized some resources for the implementation of the green growth strategy, but then the resources mobilized are not to the scale that we wish to undertake. Next slide.
And Hedges, if you could conclude also, please.
Yes, I am about to conclude. Thank you so much, Stelios. Then in terms of opportunities, as Zambia, we have availability of critical minerals for electric mobility. We have identified that we need to engage the private sector more for the participation in the green transition. There's goodwill from cooperating and development partners. And then we also see the green growth as an opportunity to enhance our natural capital. And we're also looking at green growth as one way of accelerating the implementation of our nationally determined contribution. Next slide. Okay, so this is my last slide. So in terms of lessons learned, I think what we've learned is that I think it's important as you are developing these long-term emission reduction strategies to align them to national priorities being whatever it is that you formulated in your national development plan, in the national vision, and also effective stakeholder mapping and engagement is imperative. And then obviously the issue of technical and financial resource mobilization is key. You cannot do much without this. And I already alluded to this, the issue of quality and timely statistics for informing effective monitoring and evaluation and policy decision making. And lastly, policy and legal reforms. I think in order to effectively implement these strategies, it's important that we look at the policy bottlenecks that may be there, so that then we address those bottlenecks and move to accelerate implementation of the strategies. This is my last slide. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Hedges, for giving us all these insights of the green growth strategy development process in Zambia, and also highlighting some challenges you face, but also some opportunities through this process of the strategy development. And again, you highlighted the importance of resource mobilization and policy reforms, something that has been also highlighted by previous speakers, along with the alignment with national priorities and other policies. So now we will move to Lao PDR, and we will hear from Mrs. Dalvin Sukhonpakdi. Apologies if I don't pronounce your name correctly. Deputy Director of Policy Division of the Department of Climate Change, Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. Mrs. Dalvin earned her master's degree in 2011 in Kyushu University in Japan, the Laboratory of Environmental Life Economics, Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics, and she has been working since 2015 with the Department of Climate Change at the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment as Deputy Director of the Policy Decision. And now she will provide us with some lessons learned of the LT-LEDS process in Laos. Over to you. And if you could be concise and focus on the main messages, that would be great, because we have one more speaker and then to close the session. Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. Thank you, DGI, to give me an opportunity to be here to share on the LT-LEDS and also implementation framework. Next slide, please. Actually, for Laos, we are now currently got the technical assistance from the World Bank to help us in analysis on business as usual and priorities projects, priorities activities in each sector. For Laos PDR, we are committed to reach the net zero emission by 2050. And also develop an LT-LEDS and implementation by the COP26 in Glasgow. We already commit for achieve net zero emission and also to develop the LT-LEDS. Next slide, please. So for the LT-LEDS to Laos is integration and comprehensive planning and framework that articulate action, programs, and policy to improve the country long-term low-emission development pathway. By the way, LT-LEDS and NDCs are both enshrined in the Paris Agreement, and we also follow the NDC, the second NDCs, and then LT-LEDS pathway. For the NDCs is the medium term for 2030. And National Climate Change Plan to highlight the climate target and also action, and as updated by the Paris Agreement Article 4 mentions. For the LT-LEDS is the long-term strategies development, but for the next slide, please. For now, we just do the business as usual analysis and priority section. priority areas in each section. For LT-led to Laos is we focusing on the benefit for the national and also the local to improve the air quality and also reduce negative health impact to promote natural capital and also mitigate the damage. And also engines focusing on the economic transformation, create green job, and also grow in stimulate local supply chains. In the same time is to prevent the increase of poverty, as the climate change is the main challenge for Laos in adaptation, and also climate change will like to accelerate poverty and also climate action and stimulate equitable economic growth and also fulfill Laos' commitment and generate public good NDC and climate strategy, sustainable development. Next. For the business as usual, I would like to say that we are now in the under proceeding. So we still need more data available across the sector, and also with the change in social economics and also in result change in economic growth projection, as well as for the process and update. We have the 4 steps of the process on the business as usual and also priority areas. As we have consultation with the stakeholder and also this review, and then analysis by using the model as GetMo that we use in the updating in the second NDC. Yes. Okay, next slide, please. Yes. For the objectives and approach, we provide the recommendation on the priorities, low emission development action and implementation step across the sector by moving from planning to implementation, and also the position of Laos towards in the sustainable and equitable socio-economic development in timely manner. And also we have approach here is building the existing plan, study and plans out, and also the strategies. Here is we also base it on the sector strategies and planning, and then identify implementation action to achieve short and long-term target, as well as integrating the national sustainable development and climate mitigation goal and broad set of stakeholders by using the transparent methodologies. Yeah, next slide, please. For the priority action, here is we also based on the BAU's forecasting scenario and then identify the action, and also to see the close gap between BAU and also GHG emission target, and simultaneously meet other social economic target is the action identification phase, and then the action design phase is to define how these actions work to the understanding how underlying with activities and change compared to BAU scenario. Yes, I think next slide maybe we end.
And yeah,
yes,
if you could conclude, that would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then for all what we have done or under proceeding, we base it on our regulation and strategies. Here is the key planning strategy that we follow is NDCs, and then NDC implementation plan that we just in the final stage. And then climate change strategies toward 2030 that just approved by early of this year. And then we have the National Green Growth Strategies and also National Socio-Economic Development Plan. And then we also follow by sector 5-year development plan. And yeah, that's what the main key national plan and strategy that we follow. Yes, that's I would like to share. But for LT-LED, that would be complete, I think, but we have the target that before 2025, we will have the long-term low emission strategy to be the pathway to utilize to achieve the net zero emission 2050, and we reach. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for guiding us through the LT-LED's development process in Lao PDR and the main objectives that your process is focusing, broad stakeholders engagement, alignment with key plans and strategies already in the country, and focusing on socioeconomic development objectives and considerations. And with that, we can move to our next speaker, Mrs. Kwam Sidoni. Would you like? So with that, I think we can conclude the session. Sorry for that. We have the GEG week, and it's very dynamic process here. We have many delegations, and we try also to also have them participating and hearing the lessons learned that the speakers shared today with us. It took us a bit longer. We had this opportunity because of the availability of the room, but thank you so much, all of you, for staying until this time. I would like to thank all the speakers for highlighting the opportunities and challenges of LT-LEDs and the importance to incorporate investment plans, finance plans, along with implementation actions, and move from planning to implementation. There is a lot going on and a lot to do still. As we see from the last global stocktake synthesis report, there is a lot to do still on LT-LEDs. And I would like to thank all the government representatives sharing their insights and challenges and opportunities, and for the great work they are doing on the ground, and all the other speakers for the work they do to support the countries to deliver long-term strategies for climate action. With that, thank you so much all. A lot to do still, and hope to see you to a next event. And if you continue following the GEG week, is until Friday. There are other very interesting sessions. Thank you so much, and have a nice evening or day anywhere you are.